Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. We start out with some pretty troubling news, certainly some sad news. By now, you've probably heard, but President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump have tested positive for COVID-19, the coronavirus, and we'll get into that story and the implications of it. But there are certainly other news. Things keep going. The Democrats now, in our second story, the Democrats now are pushing in-person voting. So they were all about the mail-in ballots. Now they're starting to go door to door and push for in-person voting, but probably not for the reasons that you might think. And then if we have time, we're going to give you some very sad news. It appears that as much as 50%, and the number could certainly go higher, of New York City restaurants and bars are likely to close within the next 6 months permanently. Yes, forever. And that would be a sad thing indeed. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we go any further, I have to talk about our sponsor, Big Daddy Unlimited, otherwise known as BDU. We're in the Big Daddy Unlimited studios for you live every day, Monday through Friday at 8 Eastern Standard Time, or as close as we can get to it. Of course, we're rebroadcast on America's Voice News, and I heard them getting a plug on the radio today. But America's Voice News, we're broadcast along their network as a late night show. We're also live on their Facebook channel, like right now. Good morning, howdy, how are you? To get in touch with them, all you got to do is download the free app on your Android, your iPhone, whatever streaming channel service you're likely using, from Roku, Fire Stick to Apple TV. They're on that. Channel 219 Dish Network and the Pluto channel. So they're growing as our show is growing. And one of the things that we need you to help us with for our show to grow is go to our sponsorship link. The way you find that is no matter where you're watching our show, YouTube, we have a YouTube channel now. It's at John Martin Talks. Check that out. I'm sorry, that's our Twitter handle. I'm getting ahead of myself. Twitter is at John Martin Talks, but our YouTube channel, spell it all the way out, John Martin Talks. And no matter where you're watching our video or what time, you'll see above the video a description of our show. There you'll see Big Daddy Unlimited link to our sponsorship channel. Click on that for a virtual free trial, 99 cents for the first month, and then it's $10 a month after that. Cancel at any time. You will have access to factory direct pricing on anything to do with the Second Amendment, from guns and ammo to tactical gear and everything in between. So check it out, please. All right, let's get into this story. It's something that I wish that I did not have to report, but I got to tell you, I'm not all that surprised that I have to report it. I've been worried about this for quite some time, and no, not because of masks or rallies or anything about that, but I'll explain that as we go on. Trump says, this is a Washington Post story, Trump says he and First Lady have tested positive for coronavirus. President Trump and his wife, let me stop right there before we go any further. I hope you have already joined me in praying for the First family and hoping that they get through this. And we'll talk more specifically about what this could mean. But I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that as soon as I heard this early this morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning, preparing for the show, my very first thing I did was say a prayer for Donald Trump and Melania Trump and everybody else in their family. And I'm sure that many of you would join me in that. And I'll probably be doing that moment to moment, even in my head as we're going through the show. President Trump and his wife Melania have contracted the coronavirus, he announced early Friday, after months in which he has often played down, these are the Washington Post words, played down a pandemic that has killed more than 205,000 Americans and sickened millions more. So they have to put in there right off the bat on the very first paragraph, not any kind of it's biased. So they make a statement that Donald Trump has played down the virus. And I don't know that, I guess it depends on how you look at it. But I'll show you this. I've showed you this before, but this is kind of a coronavirus timeline. And we won't go through every aspect of it right now. But if you look at it, the president was by far, and I can't emphasize this enough, by far the first not only leader, obviously, in the United States, but really world leader to respond directly to the coronavirus by shutting down all flights from China. And yes, China is the epicenter of the coronavirus. And if you actually believe that they've had less deaths than we are, then you have your head in the sand. Don't believe a thing coming out of China. But the Democrats were slow to respond to this. Donald Trump was quick to respond to this. And yes, in a sense, he played it down, but not because he didn't take it serious, because he didn't want to, in his own words, create a state of panic in that. I mean, I don't know, and I'll probably talk about this more as the show goes on, but what do they want President Trump to do? Do they want him to just come on the air and say, this is President Trump from the overall office, and make his announcement, we're all going to die, in which we are someday, and some of us today. I hope it's not you. I hope it's not me today. And certainly I hope it's not the president. But we're none of us are getting out of this alive. I hate to tell you that. And I'll expand on that in just a moment as far as on planet Earth. As far as I know, no one gets out alive. Trump, 74, was diagnosed hours after it became publicly known that Hope Hicks, and as soon as I heard about her, I sent a prayer for her. That was a few days ago. A top Trump aide who traveled with him on Air Force One and on Marine One this week tested positive Thursday morning. Now, they go in depth in this article about Hope Hicks and how she might have gotten it and, you know, what it means and all that. To me, it's totally irrelevant. There's no way of knowing for sure how you get it. Like this thing about contact tracing. Let me just say this right off the bat. The time for that, if it ever was a good scientific method, is way, way over. So you can't have millions of people infected like the article talks about here and say, oh, we're still going to do contact tracing. Now, I'm not totally poo-pooing. In other words, if you're tested positive, I do think there is some merit in letting people know in your immediate vicinity that you have tested positive. But this idea that you're going to find patient zero is ludicrous, and I don't know that it really matters right now. You know, it's not like we're trying to find the source of the coronavirus. We know what the source is. We've been in denial about it. When I say we, I'm talking about like the press don't want to say that it started in Wuhan, and it did. But does it really matter if Hope Hicks was the one to give it to President Trump or not? I don't think at this point that it does. What difference does it make, to channel my inner Hillary Clinton, if the president truly is positive, and it's a possibility it could be a false positive, but and I'm not even trying to go down that, but does it really matter how he contracted it as far as from whom? I just don't think it does, but they make a big deal of it in this. But the president, I'm going to read what he tweeted out at just before 1 o'clock last night. Tonight at FLOTUS, talking about the First Lady, and I tested positive for COVID-19. This is the president's tweet. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together. So the president's physician, Sean P. Connolly, wrote minutes later that Trump and his wife are both well at this time, and they plan to remain at home within the White House during the coronavirus. A lot of people don't really know the layout of the White House. The White House actually has an extensive personal living quarters that is basically shut down from just maybe, when I say staff, the president certainly can allow whoever he wants up there, but mainly people that clean it and actually provide services to the president and first lady. Pretty much everybody else stays out of there. So that's where it should be relatively easy to quarantine in that particular place. So I don't have any problem with that. And so how long is the quarantine going to last? The standard length of time is 14 days. So we'll see. Now, keep in mind something about this. I want to talk about this idea of quarantine because and I'm going to cover this more in detail in just a moment. One of the big issues will be, does the president or especially the president, let's face it, the president in a sense is more important than the first lady. All right. I mean, we don't have a fill-in for the first lady. We do have a vice president in that situation. So I'm not downplaying. I'm just stating matter of fact from a purely leadership role as far as the line of transition, should that be for whatever reason be necessary. So the bottom line really is, will the president actually get sick from this? Will he have the actual symptoms? And some symptoms can be as minor as a mild fever right down to being on a ventilator and at the worst case, death, right? So this is always a possibility, right? And the president is in the higher risk category. He's 74 years old, and he's got a lot of energy, but he's overweight, so he has that comorbidity and everything else. I'm just stating the facts. So ultimately, the fallout from this will be the question of whether the president gets very sick, mildly sick, or has no symptoms at all. Because if he obviously were to die, and I'm not wishing that, but then we have an obvious situation with Mike Pence, and all bets are off after that as far as campaigning and everything else. If the president actually quarantines for 14 days and either tests negative during that time or has no symptoms, well, the next debate with him is literally 15 days away, I think. So he could, then they may virtual do it or whatever. I don't know. So there's a lot of questions still out there, but I think the biggest one is, does the president during before the election, whether it's during this 14 days of quarantine or after, does he actually get sick and potentially incapacitated from that? Keep in mind, there are many people who either never show symptoms. In fact, the vast majority of people infected never show any symptoms. And there are people who have had symptoms and completely recovered in a relatively short period of time. And then there are people who have been hit very hard by this. I just found out a couple of days ago that a very dear friend of mine, I'll let him remain anonymous, actually contracted COVID months ago. And I had not really had a chance to talk with him, but he is a very healthy, as a matter of fact, athletic type guy. I think he's around 40 years old, and he got deathly ill from this. He wouldn't have been in a category that you would have thought that would have happened, but he did, was hospitalized. I found out from another friend of mine, and is clear of this, and still is suffering some lingering symptoms or ramifications for the virus. And so you never know exactly who is going to react to this and how. So there's a lot of ifs about this. But one guy we know, for instance, the national figure that contracted COVID and seems to be, I don't think ever really got sick and seems to be 100% okay now, is Senator Rand Paul from the great state of Kentucky. I think his wife as well, but he was tested positive. He quarantined. As far as I know, he never really got sick. Now we're going to play a short video for you. You may recall this. This was after President Trump's speech at the White House accepting the Republican Party's nomination. Rand Paul, his wife, and a couple of guests of his attended that thing. And this was, keep in mind, I play this for this reason. This was way after it was announced that Rand Paul had tested positive for the virus. So the world knew it. Anybody paying attention to the news knew it. Yet it was okay to get in very close contact with Mr. Paul. Check out this video.
You can tell that man behind the mask is Rand Paul.
That's good enough. That's good enough. Rand Paul, and if you haven't seen that video, the one I chose was from Fox and Friends. Look it up because they do an in-depth interview with Mr. Paul. I can't play that because it's about 10 minutes long, and he gave some of the best statements. Now, this was a month ago, basically, about COVID, the riots, and everything else. So you might want to check that out. But my question is, for this, so is this a super spreader? Because what you're going to hear, I guarantee you're hearing this already, but over the next few days and weeks, you will hear that President Trump by himself is a super spreader with his rallies and all of that kind of stuff. Without evidence, of course, but they will say that. But here, Rand Paul had the virus. People knew he had the virus, and he was attacked by people in the streets. But I never once heard the news media talk about how attacking Rand Paul, knowing he had the virus, might be a super spreader event for the people attacking him because they're the riots, the looters, the Black Lives Matter, the Antifa and all that. And of course, nothing they do is a super spreader. And now we're learning through all the news media that in fact, I got to admit, apparently I have been wrong for months now, about the violence in our streets. Do you realize, and Billy Bob, if you don't know my psychic sidekick, he's Billy Bob Bass. He's got a Twitter handle, by the way. It's at Billy Bob Bass 1. And of course, I said earlier, mine is at John Martin Talks. But he keeps me straight here. But he tells me, I might in fact have been wrong for months about the violence in the street. No, not that there hadn't been burning, rape, and probably that too, looting and everything else. But who's actually doing it? It now seems that it's white supremacists who have been doing all the burning of our cities. Not Black Lives Matter, not Antifa. Oh, they're just an idea, right? But apparently it is white supremacists that we have to worry about. And by the Proud Boys, let's just say something I get sidetracked here. I do that every now and then. But have you heard that the Proud Boys actually, and I'm not saying yay or nay about the group whatsoever, but the Proud Boys that came up in the debate the other night are actually led by a guy who is black and of Cuban descent. He's a black Hispanic, and this is supposed to be a white supremacist group, and that like 10% of their membership is people of color. Have you heard that? I mean, Rush Limbaugh kind of broke that on his show yesterday, and I've done a little research, and it appears to be true. So this Proud Boys group, I don't care what you think about them one way or another, are hardly a white supremacist group, but yet, of course, according to the media, they are. All right, back to the story. The diagnosis, talking about the president and Melania being diagnosed with COVID-19. The diagnosis is a jolt for the country's leadership, and understandably so, and had some advisors early Friday discuss. This part I don't understand. Had some advisors early Friday discussing the continuity of government should the president's condition grow worse. The vice president was not known to be infected. Talking about Mr. Pence, not Joe Biden, by the way. But what is there really to discuss? There's nothing to discuss. This is totally spelled out. That's part of the problem we have in this country, actually, that we even think we have to discuss this. The Constitution spells this out as clear as a bell. Should the president die, obviously the vice president would take over. Should the president be declared incapacitated, the vice president would take over. If something happens to him, it would be the Speaker of the House, God help us, Nancy Pelosi. It's just listed in the there's no real discussion that needs to take place. We simply need to follow the Constitution. Imagine that. If you don't get anything else out of the show, imagine that. Imagine that we actually simply followed the Constitution. Perhaps, and I'm just saying this, and I'm not trying to detract from the president and the seriousness of potentially his condition, but perhaps the problem we have in this country is that we're having to discuss what to do. No, we don't. The founding fathers in their genius spelled it out. Maybe if we actually just followed the Constitution, we wouldn't have near as much to discuss. But of course, that would end politics as we know it for both sides, because we're in a post-constitutional era already. And if we're ever going to survive as a constitutional republic, we need to elect Donald Trump, re-elect Donald Trump, period. There's no debate about that, really. The virus could further challenge Trump's re-election bid because advisors were hoping to close the gap in upcoming weeks, because he's supposedly trailing, weeks in an aggressive travel schedule and message that the coronavirus had largely passed. And that is a dadgum shame, because Trump was supposed to be in Florida today. Obviously, he's not, right? And the rallies, I hate to say this, and maybe I'll be wrong because you never know. Donald Trump, man, is a ferocious competitor. We know that. But I would assume that the rallies are probably over until after he gets reelected, because I think Donald Trump will hold rallies even after he's reelected, because he just loves them and all that. But I do believe the rallies are over, and that's a dadgum shame. I just found out from an email I got that Donald Trump was supposed to even do a rally out in Los Angeles. Did you know that? Think about that. Because people have been saying you need to come to Los Angeles. I've had members people watching us on Facebook, and I'll chime in on that. Donald Trump was taking it to the fight to California, but obviously that's probably not going to happen. But the rallies are sadly over. Of course, the media is going to blame the rallies. You know, like they said, oh, the super spreader, any event that conservatives might attend, from a motorcycle rally in Sturgis to a Trump rally, it is the super spreader. But anything that the Democrats do, of course, Biden, I mean, one thing you can't accuse him of is super spreading, although his train travel might be spread. Be interesting to see if the virus follows the train track that he's on or whatever. And it's going to be interesting to see what Biden does anyway after all this. And I'll expand upon that in just a moment. But everything that Donald Trump does is a super spreader. You can riot in the streets. You can have tens of thousands of people out protesting and everything else, and it might be called mostly peaceful. Of course, if they were white supremacists, here's why we know it's not white supremacists, because they allowed it to happen. If it were truly white supremacists were truly rioting in the streets, do you really think the Democratic mayors and governors of the states where all the rioting is happening would actually let it happen? I believe they'd stop it in a second, would they not? And have you noticed that in general, I know Louisville was, this is kind of a side story, but in general, Louisville is an exception, obviously, to this, but that the riots have toned back a little bit. I wonder why. Do you think that it's because they want to tone them back? I think it's because the polls have showed that it's hurting Biden-Kamala Harris ticket. That is the only way. But they're going to continue even after the election, because if you take Kamala Harris at her word, she has said that. She said not only will they, but they need to. Since late Tuesday, Trump has appeared with thousands at a rally in Minnesota, see, they're already there, debated Biden on stage, and has interacted with a bunch of his aides and political advisors at the White House. There was no immediate answer from Biden's camp as to whether he had been tested. Well, you know, he's tested every day, but the second presidential debate is literally Thursday, October 15th. So I would suspect right now that debate will either be canceled or it'll be some kind of virtual thing, because I just don't see it happening. And it may be postponed a day or two, you know, after Donald Trump comes out of the quarantine or whatever. But it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Now, they're trying to change the debate formats no matter what. And Donald Trump has already come out now and said that he's not going to go for any changes. So we'll see. Everything like any kind of public appearances is certainly up in the air. And will Biden go back into hiding? I don't know. A senior administration official said the White House was not aware of any additional positive cases late Thursday, though aides are being tested and contacts traced. Some aides are expected to stay home for the foreseeable future, and the presidential political travel will be canceled, officials said. That's pretty obvious. As I say, this whole contact trace thing is really pointless to me. You know, let me just expand. I said this kind of early on, and I'll go ahead and talk about it now. When I said I'm not surprised that I wish I'd never had to report it, but I'm not surprised that the president has come down with the virus. And no, it's not because of all these talking points of, you know, from Tulsa, Oklahoma to the latest rally in Minnesota or whatever. I don't think that has anything to do with it. I don't think it has anything to do with whether or not he's wearing a mask and all that. And this, some people may not want to hear this, and this is just my opinion for all you out there that want to fact check, and for algorithm on Facebook. Let me state again, this is just my opinion. I'm not stating it as a fact, but it's my opinion based on my knowledge, based on my research, what I stay, you know, in tune every day. I just kind of assume that at some point, if this virus is as contagious as they claim it to be, and it is spread through the air and everything else, just taking it, that the chances are the vast majority of us are going to get it. It's just inevitable. And I'm not a big believer in the vaccine. I'm not opposed to a vaccine per se, but based on the science that I've seen, I mean, this is COVID-19, right? So that implies there are 18 others. Has there been any vaccine? Are there any vaccines for respiratory disease, really? Are there vaccines for anything that is out in the air? Not really. If you stop and think about it, not a very effective one. For the viruses that we have contained, they're not generally contracted airborne viruses. They're very difficult to contain. So I've kind of assumed, and I'm not saying, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to protect ourselves, all that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that I believe that it's inevitable that a huge percentage of the world's population, including Americans, are going to be exposed to this disease and likely be tested or be positive, not necessarily tested, because not all of us are going to be tested. That doesn't mean, if you look at the science, if I'm right about this, it's nothing to be totally like panic stricken with, because the vast majority of people are not going to have symptoms, period. Not going to have symptoms. And they're not going to actually have the disease in a life-threatening way. And the people who actually contract and have symptoms, the likelihood of dying from this, even if you accept the 205,000 people have died from this, tragic as that may sound, of course, we know that not everybody died from coronavirus. Well, the only person that we know didn't die from corona apparently was Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But everybody else, if you get hit in a car wreck, you probably died from coronavirus. But the reality is, even if you say the numbers are factual, it's still a minute amount of people compared to the U.S. population. So I say all that to say that I believe, as I say, it's my opinion that a good chunk of us are going to contract this virus in some form or fashion. So that's why I'm not surprised that the president and the first lady, considering no matter what, how much exposure they have just because of the position, they can't literally go in the bunker like Biden. They just can't. So I'm not surprised. I don't want to ramble on that, so I'll move along. The president has pushed publicly for the country to reopen fully, despite, this is where the bias creeps in, despite stubbornly high level of cases, hoping that the resulting economic benefit and potential for nationwide optimism would spur his electoral chances. So they're saying that the only reason that the president has basically been positive about reopening the country is to help his electoral chances. Now, am I saying that wouldn't be part of your political strategy? No, I'm not naive about that. But I don't believe for a minute that is the main or sole reason that Donald Trump is trying to reopen the economy. Donald Trump was all about the economy before he even hardly got into the office. And I've told you this before, but if I say it, it bears repeating. To understand people, you need to understand something core principle about them. And yes, contrary to the mainstream media, Donald Trump has some core principles. And one of them is making money. He is, and they say, oh, he's all about making money. Yes, he is. But if you understand that, then you understand this, that Donald Trump doesn't really care about who you're sleeping with. He doesn't really care whether you go to church or not. He doesn't really care what profession you're in. He cares about putting some money in your pocket. Because the way Donald Trump believes as a businessman, and once again, this is my opinion, but I think it can be backed up by observation and fact, is that he believes, and I know this is something scary for some of you snowflakes out there, he believes that if you got money in your pocket, you can figure all the rest of that stuff out for yourself. You don't need him. You don't need the federal government telling you who to sleep with, when to wake up. You don't need a prison guard telling you when you can go to the bathroom and which one to use necessarily. You can say whoever you want to be. You can wake up and say, I'm Sheila and not Steve or whatever. Donald Trump doesn't care about that to the extent that they want to make it that way. And I'm not saying he personally doesn't have some strong convictions. I'm saying he doesn't believe government should dictate that to you. He believes that if you are fat and happy, so to speak, you have money in your pocket, you can figure all of this other stuff. Sounds like my I don't hear it in my headset. Really bothers. But to me, they talk about spur his electoral chances. How about he's just trying to save our great nation? There we go. I hear it now. Back to this article. An infected president could raise concerns nationally about reopening businesses and schools, both key pushes from the president as the disease has spread. So they're basically criticizing Donald Trump for trying to get the economy open and kind of insinuating that maybe that might be one of the reasons why he or you contract COVID-19 is because of the policies that he's had. You know, I got to thinking about this as I was doing my research this morning and compiling my show notes. I was thinking about how far our country has gone down this rat hole of fear, and on all sides. And it's troubling. It's very troubling to me, because you remember, I've talked about this from the beginning, that at some point we need to look at what gave all these little Napoleons the right to shut us down in the first place. But I got to thinking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You know, he is the epitome of progressives. He was the one that kind of really started on a national level the progressive movement. But there are some things to admire about Franklin Roosevelt. And one of the things, and this shows just how far, if you think about it, the current Democratic Party and really our politics in general have moved to the left from where Franklin Roosevelt was, which is hard to believe. We're going to play a snippet from one of his inaugural speeches. And this is very, very important. And I think it absolutely has to do with today. Check this out.
The time to speak the truth frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
There you go.
Nameless, unreasonable.
Nameless, and I should have let it play a little bit longer, but nameless is my fault. Nameless, unreasonable fear is what he was talking about right there. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. What was the country facing at that moment when FDR took office? We were just coming out, or beginning potentially to come out, of the worst economic straits this country has ever seen, even to this day, the Great Depression. People were literally starving in America, if you can believe that. We had like 25% continuous unemployment, not temporarily, those kind of things. We were on the eve of the Second World War, coming off of the First World War. We were on the eve, and all of this was kind of known at the time. I'm sure FDR knew it. The general public didn't necessarily know it. We were on the age of the nuclear age, when we literally were developing the power to destroy mankind and the entire planet. These are the things we were facing when FDR said, and we'd come off of, pandemics that killed a lot more people, like the Spanish flu was not but a couple of decades prior to this. And we had polio and all that. We had things that Mr. Roosevelt himself was stricken with. Yet he told the American people that the only thing we really have to fear is fear itself. And those words are as true today as they ever have been. And yes, I would say this, even if the worst possible case scenario happens and Donald Trump were to succumb to this virus, we still can overcome all of this if we understand the greatness of America. The greatness of America, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not trying to downplay what the president is going through or what he may or may not go through. I'm just telling you that we as an American people need to get some backbone in us in general. And I know I'm painting with a broad brush, but we need to take Mr. Roosevelt's words to heed. We don't have anything to fear but fear itself. The greatest enemy this country is facing, yes, China's a great enemy, maybe Russia, all this kind of stuff, Antifa, Proud Boy, I don't care. The greatest enemy we will always face is our own ignorance and apathy and fear. To me, that is it. Because the American people, worst case scenario, I believe that our republic is in grave jeopardy should something happen to Donald Trump or he lose the election. I've been saying that for a while. But I will tell you, we could survive even a Joe Biden or Kamala Harris presidency if the American people actually, and I hope if they wise up and rise up, we won't even have to worry about that. But we can survive anything if we get our head out of our butts. I'm not saying don't wear a mask, but don't hide behind it. Realize that the country has always been up to the people that are living today. It's not, I mean, yeah, we've been on the standing on the shoulder of giants, and there's no question about that. But Ronald Reagan said it probably better than anybody, and I'm sure I'll botch it, that basically all of that the founding fathers gave us, it doesn't come into our bloodstream automatically. We have to reteach it, relearn it, and teach it to the next generation. So what I take from that in today's world is that it is up to us. It's not up to the founding fathers. They're dead and gone. And yes, something terrible could happen to the president. None of us are getting out of this alive, and I'm not talking about COVID. I'm talking about the idea that Charles de Gaulle said years ago when he was, after World War II, when he was leaving the presidency of France. They said, how will France get on without you? And he looked them right in the eye and said, the graveyard is full of indispensable men. And he's absolutely right about that. So to think that it's not up to us, to this some, that and this is something, I know I'm rambling, but it just pisses me off and it worries me, that we somehow think that we're challenged more right now than at any other point in history, that somehow we're terminally unique in that our generation, and you hear it in our young people's voice all the time. And what we're facing, even the worst case scenarios of COVID-19 doesn't compare with storming the beaches of Normandy with your chances of dying. Anyway, I'm fed up with the fear. I'm fed up with it. And I think that the left is going to use President Trump's potential illness here to just stoke the flames of fear even more. And I just don't see how that serves us as a nation. It never has. Fear has never been the willingness. And let me just tell you this. Facing your fear and overcoming it is the true sign of courage. Courage is not, standing in the dark. It's not charging in where, others few to tread, so to speak. It is facing your fears and overcoming them. That's what courage is all about. And so if we don't face our fears, if we let the left use Donald Trump's, whatever happens with him and Melania, and I'm praying for nothing but the best, but if we let that dictate us, that's what we're hoping, that you'll stay home and everything else. I don't know. It just bothers me, this whole fear thing. Anyway, I'll move along. Sorry, I just get on a little rant, but I'm concerned about the nation. During a pre-recorded speech to Catholic Charity Dinner at New York on Thursday night, Trump took his usual optimistic tone about the virus. He said, and I just want to say that at the end of the pandemic is in sight, and that next year will be one of the greatest years in the history of our country. Now, some people may say, of course, if he already knew this, that, he's downplaying the disease. I don't think so at all. Because the left would want you to be, and the mainstream media would want you to come out there and say, oh, this is the president. We're all going to die. Like somehow that would help us. I don't get that at all. It's like they keep asking him questions about, like, what was it that John Roberts with even Fox News yesterday in a Kayleigh McEnany press briefing. They kept asking her about, will she categorically say that President Trump is against white nationalists and white supremacists? And Kayleigh McEnany just basically said, a few things. And John Roberts of Fox News, of course, kept asking her the same thing over and over. She said, I've already answered that. The president's already answered that. So they're going to ask this over and over. They want you to be fearful and everything else. So they want President Trump is always going to be downplaying the disease. Do they really think that the president now is going to say, we're dying, we're all going to die? I mean, God help us if we ever have a president that does something like that. In recent months, Trump has told others he was not particularly concerned about the virus, officials said, after initially showing some fear. Many of Trump's aides have also eschewed masks, both in the West Wing presidential offices and on trips. Let me ask you something. Let me check my time. We're almost out of time. But has there been, and maybe there has been, I'm not saying I'm an expert on this, but has there been a documented case where masks actually prevented someone from contracting disease? Now, what I'm saying is, I'm not talking about they don't prevent some things, but what I'm alluding to, is there a case where, let's say, 20 people went to church I'm just using an example. And that, half of them got sick from COVID and the other half didn't because they were wearing masks. I haven't seen anything like that. I'm not saying don't wear masks. I'm simply saying that they're not the beginning and end all. Masks have saved some people, maybe not. I mean, here's something I wish I could play a clip for it, but if you're a South Park fan, and even if you're not, you need to see their latest episode because it's the new season and it kind of encapsulates what we've been going through for the last 6 months or so. But they call the mask in their chin diapers because there's all these people wearing them. I mean, it's just crazy, man. Trump told Fox News' Sean Hannity during an interview, I watched it last night, by the way, that he and the First Lady were tested after they learned about Hicks and were awaiting test results. Trump said, I just went for a test. He said this on Hannity. I went for a test and we'll see what happens. Who knows? We spent a lot of time with Hope and we'll see it. So then they try to blame it all on Hope, not the president and Hannity, but this article. I want to skip forward here to the end of this, okay? So the White House administers daily coronavirus tests to aides, reporters, and others who come into contact with the president. But public health experts warn they are not foolproof and the mask and social distancing are still the best protection against the virus. Not foolproof. It's never been safe to leave the cave, ladies and gentlemen. It's never been safe. And it's not now. And it's not because of coronavirus. I mean, I've lost family members from everything from car wrecks to brain aneurysms to like my nephew at 29 years old from cancer. Life is fatal. It's not about how long you live. It's how you live whatever time you're blessed to have. And I'm not going to be one of these people that's just cowering in the corner. If it takes me out, and I'm not wishing it on anybody, and I'm not saying don't protect yourself, but don't protect yourself to the point that you might that you're the walking dead. I mean, that's what a lot of us have been. But as far as what does it mean for the election? Well, it depends. These are my words. It depends on whether the president gets full-blown symptoms or not. Obviously, if he gets sick and something were to happen to him or he just gets deathly ill, that could be a game changer. So we just don't know. Because if Donald Trump quarantines for 14 days and then seems fine, then I don't see a huge impact one way or another. We just have to wait and see. One question, too, will Joe Biden go back into hiding? If I got time, I'll do the story about how they, started coming out a little bit more with the Democrats. But who knows? Will Joe go back into hiding? I'm going to say this, and some people may take this the wrong way. I think this also, the fact that that President Trump has contracted the COVID-19 also puts out that we absolutely need to confirm that Supreme Court justice seat ASAP before the election. We need to get that person on the court because worst case scenario, what if we actually lose President Trump one way or another? We still have to go on. And I guarantee you that President Trump feels the same way about that. I think I'm comfortable in speaking for him. And that we need to confirm that justice no matter what. But back to this question, what does it mean for the election? Well, you tell me what it means. Are you more or less inclined if you were already supporting? If you hate Donald Trump, I'm not really talking to you. But if you are on the fence or if you are an adamant Trump supporter, does this impact your decision to go to the polls and vote in any way? Tell me one way or another how it does. I'd like to hear it. Chime in on it. Because that's ultimately, it's not up to me. It's not even up to Donald Trump. It's ultimately up to you, the American people, how this impacts you. We'll see. All right. A quick story here about, this is from the New York Times. Check my time. I got about 2 or 3 minutes left. I just want to get into it really quickly. As Trump sows doubts on mail, Democrats push more in-person voting. Philadelphia voters will soon hear a familiar election year sound at their front door. The rap of Democratic official canvassing for support. But the messaging they hear might take them by surprise. Basically what they're saying is that the Democrats now are starting to go door to door. They haven't been. The Republicans have been going door to door, personal contact with voters for months. The Democrats have not been doing it because of their concern for the voters. Whether or not that's true or not, I don't know. And of course, the Democrats have been pushing all mail-in balloting for a long time now. Let me cut to the chase on this. First of all, it'll be interesting to see if they continue to do this in-person contact since the president now has contracted coronavirus, because, you know, that can make a case that if he can get it, anybody can get it. So we'll see. But here's the reason why the Democrats are starting to question the mail-in ballot approach. It's not because they're concerned about fraud. You know, the Republicans and President Trump are very much concerned about fraud. And there's a lot of evidence, and I talked about on yesterday's show, of why they should be. Check out our podcast along the ways I told you before. But the bottom line, the reason why the Democrats are beginning to feel antsy about the all mail-in ballot is because they don't believe their voters, and I'm not saying this as far as I believe this, I'm telling you what they believe. They don't believe their voters are smart enough to fill them out correctly and that they'll get tossed. They're not worried about fraud. They're worried about the votes getting tossed because of mistakes made by their voters. And if you don't think that the Democrats believe that their voters are stupid, plain ignorant and stupid, then I'll give you another example. Why do you think the Democrats fight voter ID all the time? They literally are implying, and they do this all the time, and I'm not saying this, I'm telling you what they're saying. They imply that black Americans, for instance, don't have the capability of getting a voter ID. To me, that's about as insulting and racist as it possibly gets, that based on some kind of ethnicity that you can't get an ID, when the reality is you have to have an ID to go and do anything, period. So to imply that anybody, regardless of color or maybe party affiliation, are too stupid to fill out the ballots says a lot about what Democrats think of their voters and people of color. All right, well, we're pretty much out of time. I want to remind you to check out this article. There's a couple of different versions of it about the closing of the potential for New York City restaurants and everything. It's a very, very sad day. I don't know if we have time to put up the meme that I had at the end of the story. I was just talking about the Godzilla meme. It's pretty funny that just when you thought 2020 couldn't get any worse, here comes Godzilla. That's kind of how it feels right now. Let me just say, as we close the show, once again, I'm praying for President Trump. I'm praying for Melania Trump, that they get through this, they're quarantined and nothing, they have no symptoms, and they come out of this free. I'm praying for everyone. I'm praying for this great nation. Check out our sponsorship link, as I told you at the top of the show. But I'll pray for your family. You pray for mine. But let's all agree to pray for this great nation, and above all else, like I say, each and every day. And I mean this with the bottom of my heart, and I'm sending it out especially to President Trump and Melania, from my heart, from my family. Have a blessed day.